You'd been awake since 4 in the morning and it was now past midnight, 20 hours. Your feet throbbed with pain that shot up through your legs with every step. Your hands were raw from scrubbing, your back ached from carrying, your eyes burned from exhaustion. But you couldn't stop. Not yet. The Duchess's chamber pot needed emptying. Her fireplace needed stoking. Her nightclothes needed laying out. And if any of it wasn't done exactly right, if she woke and found something not to her satisfaction, you'd be beaten, or fired, or both. You were 14 years old, working as a chambermaid in a grand estate in England in 1823. You'd been here for 2 years. 2 years of never sitting down during work hours. 2 years of eating scraps in a cold basement kitchen after the family had finished their meals. 2 years of sleeping in an attic room so cold that ice formed on the inside of the windows. You earned £4 a year. £4 for destroying your body serving people who didn't know your name, who'd walk past you in the hallway without seeing you, who treated you like furniture, like you were part of the house, not a human being with feelings and needs and a breaking point you were rapidly approaching. This was life in service to the wealthy, not the elegant world you saw when you served at their dinners, but the brutal reality of the servants' quarters, the endless work, the constant fear, the knowledge that you were nothing, that your life existed only to make their lives comfortable, and that one mistake, one moment of weakness could cost you everything. The 18 and 1900s saw millions of people, mostly women and children, working as domestic servants in wealthy households across Europe and America. Service was the largest employer of women, and it was brutal. Servants worked 16 to 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. They had no days off except maybe a few hours on Sunday if the family was feeling generous. They lived in the attics or basements of the homes they worked in, often in unheated rooms shared with several other servants. They ate leftover food after the family finished their meals. They were paid barely enough to survive, and that wage could be withheld for any infraction the employer decided warranted punishment. There were no labor laws protecting servants, no regulations about working conditions or hours. You worked until the work was done, which meant you never stopped working. The hierarchy among servants was rigid. Upper servants like butlers and housekeepers had some authority and better conditions. Lower servants, chambermaids, scullery maids, kitchen boys, they were at the bottom, worked the hardest, paid the least, treated the worst. And if you were young, female, and attractive, you faced additional dangers. Sexual harassment and assault by male employers or their sons was common. Servants who became pregnant were fired immediately, turned out with no references and no way to find other work. The system destroyed people, used them up, discarded them, and society saw nothing wrong with it because servants were lower class. Their suffering didn't matter. Ellen Shaw was 12 when she entered service at a country estate in Yorkshire in 1821. Her family was desperately poor. Her father worked sporadically as a laborer. Her mother took in washing. They had 7 children and couldn't feed them all. Ellen was sent to service as soon as she was old enough. The estate employed 30 servants. Ellen was hired as a scullery maid, the lowest position. Her job was working in the scullery, a small room off the kitchen where the dirtiest work happened. She washed dishes, scrubbed pots and pans, cleaned the floors, hauled coal and water, plucked chickens, gutted fish. Any task too dirty or hard for the other servants fell to Ellen. She worked from 4 in the morning until midnight or later. Her hands were constantly in cold, greasy water. The lye soap burned her skin. Within weeks, her hands were covered in painful sores that never healed because they never had time to heal. She'd finish one day's work and start the next with her hands still damaged. The cycle never broke. Her hands became permanently damaged, scarred, aged far beyond her years. Ellen's living conditions were appalling. She slept in the attic with 4 other lower servants. The room was barely furnished, thin mattresses on the floor, no heat, one small window. In winter it was freezing. Ellen would wake with frost on her blanket. In summer it was stifling. The air was thick and hard to breathe. She was given 2 dresses, one to wear while the other was being washed. Both were thin, worn, provided no warmth. She had no coat, no proper shoes. Her feet were constantly cold and wet. She developed chilblains, painful swelling, and sores from cold exposure. Walking was agony, but she had to keep moving, keep working, because stopping meant being fired. And being fired meant going back to her family who couldn't afford to keep her, or ending up on the streets. Neither option was survivable. So Ellen worked. No matter how much pain she was in, no matter how exhausted, no matter how badly she was treated. The treatment of servants was often cruel. The cook who supervised the scullery was a harsh woman who maintained discipline through fear and violence. She hit Ellen with wooden spoons, with her fists, with whatever was handy if Ellen was too slow or made a mistake. Ellen was hit almost daily, hard enough to leave bruises, hard enough sometimes to knock her down, but she couldn't complain, couldn't report it. The cook had authority. Ellen had none. And if Ellen spoke up, she'd be fired for insubordination. So she took the beatings. Learn to flinch at sudden movements. Learn to work faster, more carefully, trying to avoid giving the cook reasons to hit her. But there were always reasons. The cook was cruel because she could be, because the system allowed it, because servants weren't protected. They were property, objects, things to be used. If you were Ellen, 12 years old and working 20-hour days in conditions that were destroying your body, being beaten regularly, earning barely enough to survive, knowing this was all your life would ever be, what would have kept you going? What hope could you have found in that situation? The sexual danger servants faced was constant and terrifying. Young female servants were vulnerable to assault by male employers, their sons, male guests, upper-level male servants. Ellen was assaulted when she was 13 by the estate's groundskeeper. He cornered her in the scullery when she was alone. She fought. He was stronger. When it was over, he threatened her. Said if she told anyone, he'd say she'd seduced him, that she'd be fired and arrested for immorality. Ellen believed him. She stayed silent, but she was terrified, terrified it would happen again, terrified she might become pregnant, terrified that her life, already unbearable, was about to get worse. She did become pregnant, at 13. She tried to hide it as long as possible, wearing her loose dress to conceal her growing belly. But by 6 months it was obvious. The housekeeper noticed and reported it to the lady of the house. Ellen was summoned to the drawing room. The lady didn't ask for Ellen's side of the story, didn't ask who the father was, just told her she was dismissed immediately. Immoral behavior wouldn't be tolerated. Ellen tried to explain, tried to say she'd been forced. The lady didn't want to hear it. Ellen was escorted off the property that day with nothing but the dress she wore. No back wages, no reference, nothing. But here's what makes the servant system even more monstrous. The wealthy families knew what was happening. They knew their male family members assaulted servants. They knew about the pregnancies. They knew servants were beaten and overworked. And they did nothing. Or worse, they blamed the servants. A pregnant servant was dismissed as immoral, while the man who'd assaulted her faced no consequences. An injured servant was blamed for being careless. A servant who complained about working conditions was fired for being ungrateful. The system protected the employers completely while offering servants no protection at all. And society accepted this. Churches preached sermons about servants knowing their place. Laws gave employers almost unlimited authority over their servants. The wealthy could literally do whatever they wanted to the people working in their homes, and there was no recourse. Servants existed in a legal gray area where they had obligations but almost no rights. They could be abused, exploited, assaulted, and had nowhere to turn for help. Think about living in someone else's house, working 20 hours a day for them. Having no freedom, no privacy, no control over your own life. Being subject to their whims, their moods, their violence. Having no legal protection. No way to escape except to another household that would likely be just as bad. That was the reality for millions of servants. Could you have survived it? Would you have wanted to? Most servants didn't escape the system. They worked until their bodies gave out, then died young or ended up in poorhouses. Ellen's story took the path so many did, dismissed while pregnant at 13. Nowhere to go, no money, No skills except service, and no one would hire a visibly pregnant girl with no reference. She tried to return to her family. They wouldn't take her in. The shame of an unmarried pregnant daughter was too much. They turned her away. Ellen ended up on the streets, begging, sleeping in doorways, starving. She gave birth alone in an alley in the middle of winter. No midwife, no help. The baby, a girl, was born alive but didn't survive the night. The cold took her within hours. Ellen wrapped the tiny body in her shawl and left it in a church doorway. She didn't even know if anyone found it or if the baby was buried or just thrown away. She was 13 years old. She'd been raped, fired, abandoned by everyone, and lost a child. And her life was about to get worse. Ellen did the only thing available to her: prostitution. It was the only way a destitute woman could earn money. She sold herself for pennies, sometimes just for food. Sometimes for a place to sleep that wasn't a frozen street. The work was dangerous, degrading, and often violent. Men hurt her, beat her, used her, and discarded her. She contracted venereal disease, probably syphilis, within 6 months. There was no treatment. The disease progressed slowly, painfully. Ellen developed sores. Then more serious symptoms. Her health deteriorated. By 15, she looked 30, emaciated, covered in sores, clearly dying. She couldn't work anymore, couldn't earn money. She was dying on the streets. No one helped. No charity would take a prostitute. No hospital would admit her. She was moral refuse, society's trash, deserving of her suffering because of the choices she'd made. Never mind that those choices had been forced on her, that she'd been a child with no options, that the system had destroyed her deliberately. Society saw only a fallen woman, someone whose death was deserved. Ellen died at 16 in a workhouse infirmary. She'd finally become sick enough that the workhouse admitted her. She lasted 3 days. The syphilis had progressed to her brain. She was delirious, in constant pain. She died alone, was buried in an unmarked grave in the workhouse cemetery. Another dead prostitute, another nameless victim of a system that had chewed her up and spit her out. Ellen's employer, the lady who'd fired her without asking questions, never knew what happened to her, never wondered, never cared. Ellen had been replaced within days. Another young girl from a desperate family took the scullery maid position, and the cycle continued. More girls would be worked to exhaustion. More would be assaulted. More would be fired and forced into prostitution and early deaths, because that's how the system worked. It consumed the poor to serve the rich, and no one with power saw any reason to change it. The servant system persisted for centuries. Gradually reformed but never truly fixed, servants eventually gained some protections, limits on working hours, requirements for days off, but these changes came slowly and were often ignored by employers. The fundamental power imbalance remained. Servants were still dependent on employers for housing, food, employment, still vulnerable to abuse, still treated as lesser. The mindset that saw servants as different, as not fully human, that mindset persisted long after the legal framework began to change. Ellen died in 1824, but servants were still being exploited, assaulted, and discarded well into the 20th century. The mechanisms evolved, but the core remained the same. Poor people serving rich people with minimal protection and maximum vulnerability. That dynamic is still playing out today in different forms. Domestic workers, day laborers, anyone trapped in positions where they have no power and their employers have all of it. Ellen was 12 when she entered service, 16 when she died, 4 years from child to corpse. 4 years in which a system designed by the wealthy for the wealthy destroyed her systematically. She wasn't weak. She wasn't morally deficient. She was a victim. A child victimized by adults who had all the power and none of the accountability. Her death was preventable. If she'd been protected from assault, if she'd been supported instead of fired, if society had valued her life as much as it valued the comfort of the wealthy family she'd served. But those protections didn't exist, and Ellen died because of it. Her story isn't unique, it's representative, repeated thousands of times among servants across centuries, and those stories are largely forgotten, erased from the historical record because servants were invisible. Their suffering didn't matter enough to document. We remember the grand estates, the elaborate dinners, the elegant balls. We don't remember the children working in the sculleries, the women being assaulted in the hallways, the bodies buried in unmarked graves after the system destroyed them. But they're the real story, the foundation that supported all that wealth and elegance. And until we acknowledge that, until we recognize that the comfort of the past's wealthy was built on the suffering of people like Ellen, we're complicit in erasing them. Ellen deserved better. She deserved protection, support, dignity, life. She got none of it, just exploitation, just abuse, just an early death that no one mourned. That's the truth behind the palace walls. That's what service really meant. And it's a truth we need to remember. Because the power dynamics that killed Ellen are still operating, still deciding whose lives matter and whose don't, still sacrificing the vulnerable for the comfort of the powerful. And until we dismantle those dynamics completely, the Ellens of every era will keep dying. Keep proving that progress is meaningless if it doesn't reach everyone. Keep reminding us that behind every grand estate and elegant lifestyle are invisible people whose suffering made it possible. Ellen's death demands we remember, demands we do better, demands we finally value all human lives equally. She deserved that. We owe her that. And all the forgotten servants whose names we'll never know.